This is TWiT.
Classical music that is soundly and roundly in the public domain that is getting caught by content ID filters, specifically on YouTube, but it's not the only place that uses content ID, and now the EU wants everyone to use it. So it's just sort of a case study, I guess, in how flawed those filters can be. A couple of instances recently, one involving a professor in Germany who decided to do some experimenting on classical music. And in his particular instance, he was making educational videos. So well, obviously, even if you're using music that's in the public domain, you shouldn't have to make a fair use argument. But yet he would have had that too, assuming any of what he posted was in copyright. He did some tests to see how much his educational videos would be flagged by Content ID, and the answer, unsurprisingly, was a lot. And he was including works by, let's see, I'm not sure. Oh, here we go. Bartok, Schubert, Puccini, and Wagner. And he did have some success in pushing back and getting his videos reinstated. He was a little upset they were not converted to a free Creative Commons license, which is what he wanted. But still, he had to go through this huge process and agony to be able to get his videos up. And then we have the instance of another musician in this case who recorded himself playing Bach. And here it wasn't on YouTube, it was on Facebook. And Sony Music, of all people, asserted rights in the 40 seconds of performance that he posted. And his name, James Rhodes, then had to go back and forth with Sony Music. There is a great piece at EFF about this, pointing out that not only does a bot, a content ID sort of bot, seem to have flagged the music for, hey, you should take this down to begin with, but then it seems to have been involved in the appeals process as well. Because Rhodes pushed back and pointed out that the music was actually older than the entire U.S. copyright system, and yet Sony Music stuck to its guns, claiming to be the rights holder here. Nate, other than these things are not perfect, what can we do to encourage folks like Sony and others to take the appeals process seriously?
That is a great question. Mm-hmm. There was another piece that we published at EFF a while back. This is in our Takedown Hall of Shame. It was earlier this year. An artist who published a video on YouTube that was 10 hours of white noise, just static, got 5 copyright takedowns for 10 hours of static video, right? Obviously ridiculous. I think what we have to do is we have to realize that robots are not the solution here. Automated content moderation just has absolutely horrible accuracy at this point. And it's not just that it's not a silver bullet, it's actually bad at doing its job. What is there that we can do to get rid of it? Not that much. It looks like it's here to stay. The thing that we need to do is make sure that it doesn't get imported into different fields. Copyright is actually one of the easier fields here for bots to do. Shazam, the cell phone app that listens to a song and compares it to a list of songs that it has up there in the cloud somewhere and tells you what's playing, can only do that because it has recordings and it's doing an actual match. That's what Content ID is supposed to be doing. In the Facebook Sony Music example, it was apparently doing something else because it was not a recording that Sony had made. It was a brand new recording that Sony still matched. We're seeing folks both on Capitol Hill and in Europe demanding that systems like Content ID be repurposed for discovering and taking down terrorist or extremist content. That is even worse of an idea. Extremist content is often brand new. And the heuristics involved are, as I think we've seen from the Sony Music Bach takedown, the heuristics are terrible. The content industry has a ton of money, and they're still bad at it. They still issue 5 takedowns for static. If we start doing automated takedowns for extremist speech, we're going to get a whole bunch of legitimate speech being erroneously taken down. And at the same time, instill a false sense of security that actual extremist speech is being taken down when we know that there are false negatives as well as false positives. So Content ID might be here to stay in the copyright realm, but we have to resist its expansion outside copyright as hard as we absolutely can.
It seems like the courts, well, first of all, the DMCA itself has a provision that if you wrongfully oppose someone's claim that they have the rights to this material in the notice and takedown process, you're supposed to be on the hook for their expenses in prolonging the discussion about whether the piece should be up or not. And then secondly, we have the Dancing Baby case from the Ninth Circuit that had some discussion of a burden on the rights holders to reasonably consider fair use in their analysis before deciding something should be pulled down. Stefan, it just doesn't seem like, certainly in Sony's case here, moderating this process with bots throughout the process, it doesn't seem like they're very intimidated by those potential downsides.
Doesn't seem that way at all. And I guess I don't know enough about the mechanics here. Are there any penalties if they do any false positives here? And is there any downside, or can they just be over-inclusive without real fear of repercussion? I mean, what's the kind of framework here? It's something I just don't know enough about.
So after the Ninth Circuit's decision in Lens, which is the Dancing Baby case that we represented Stephanie Lenz on, the standard is if they had actual knowledge of a potential fair use claim, then there are penalties of them against them. If they just got it wrong, then there's no penalties. And if the bot is out there operating on its own, there are no penalties. I think there's an important distinction to make here, which is that the Ninth Circuit's ruling only extends to DMCA takedown requests. Content ID is not a DMCA takedown request system. It is a less than DMCA takedown system.
But doesn't it trigger the system? Isn't that how they know it doesn't?
It doesn't actually.
Okay.
Content ID triggers Content ID, which is YouTube treats as separate from DMCA. And Content ID strikes don't have the same. It doesn't have the same counter notice provision, and it doesn't have the same 512F protections.
It's a really good distinction to bear in mind.
Yeah, Content ID is only available to the big guys. Independent labels don't have access to Content ID. Independent artists don't have access to Content ID. You have to be a trusted partner, which means the big, however many music or movie companies, in order to get into Content ID. Those companies are still free to do DMCA, which is a stronger, but both stronger and weaker in some senses. But Content ID is an extra legal system.
Right. So the difference there is Content ID sends you a notice, and it takes things down though too, right?
It does take things down, but it's not a DMCA takedown in the sense that you can't do a DMCA counter notice and automatically get your stuff back up.
Ah.
And it's not under penalty of perjury like a DMCA takedown is.
Yeah.
And has anybody tested the actual knowledge standard in the robot context? I mean, if this is a program that's identifying these things, how would that play out? I mean, whose knowledge is relevant if it's a robot that's tagging these things?
We'll find out eventually, but we don't know yet.
Yeah. Matt, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that it seems like I think that's what Stefan is alluding to. It seems like an odd carve out that if I put it in a system that keeps knowledge out of it, I wouldn't be liable for damages for, by not knowing anything. That seems like, especially when you're enforcing your supposed rights against someone else, it strikes you as that's an excellent place for punitive damages. On the other side, with the takedown, with the instance of old, music that's outside of a copyright realm, I think that is actually from a design perspective, that's a very difficult place to carve out. Where it wouldn't have a takedown for, because when you think about the system as a whole, 99.9% of all things that are going in there have a copyright on them, and even your music. So if I'm recording a terrible version of Bach, my recording itself does have copyright for it. So you'd almost have to have, as a system, to not flag these things. You don't have to have a recording of the music for music that is outside of the copyright that would automatically not flag recordings of that. And so that is, I think that's why these sort of stories show up in the news so much, is because, it seems outrageous that YouTube would flag that. But from like a design perspective, it really makes more sense that those are the ones that are showing up, and not great and not good. And they should improve upon that. But I'm much more concerned about the sort of automated enforcement that Sony's doing, than recordings of Bach or somebody getting picked up by the Content ID, because I think that does make more sense from a design. Obviously, YouTube should work on fixing that and everything like that, but it does make more sense.